चलिए आज एक बहुत ही गहरे और ज़रूरी सवाल में उतरते हैं। वो सवाल ये है कि आखिर क्यों कुछ देशों में हिंसा की दरें दूसरों के मुकाबले इतनी ज़्यादा होती हैं। ये एक ऐसी पहेली है जो पूरी दुनिया को उलझाए हुए है और आज हम इसकी परतों को खोलने की कोशिश करेंगे।
ये बात सोचने पर मजबूर कर देती है ना, कि अक्सर सबसे अच्छे इरादे या सबसे बड़े वादे ही सबसे बड़ी त्रासदियों की वजह बन जाते हैं। और ये जो विरोधाभास है, यही आज की हमारी पड़ताल के बिल्कुल केंद्र में है।
तो हमारा मुख्य सवाल यही है और इस सवाल के जवाब के लिए हम हामिद बशीरिया के रिसर्च को एक जासूस की तरह फॉलो करेंगे, जो सुरागों को जोड़कर इस ग्लोबल मिस्ट्री को सुलझाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। तो पहला सुराग हमें कहाँ मिलता है? रिसर्च ये बताती है कि हत्या की ये दरें कोई इत्तेफाक नहीं है। ये यूं ही नहीं होती। ये किसी भी समाज के अंदर मौजूद बहुत ही गहरी और स्थायी चीज़ों की तरफ इशारा करती हैं, जैसे कि उस समाज की संस्कृति। और यहीं पर कहानी एक दिलचस्प मोड़ लेती है। क्या हो अगर हिंसा की जड़ें किसी एक इंसान के दिमाग में नहीं, बल्कि पूरे समाज की, पूरे देश की संस्कृति में छिपी हों? वही संस्कृति जो हमारे सोचने, फैसले लेने और हमारे व्यवहार के तरीके को शक्ल देती है। तो अब हमारी इस जासूसी कहानी में एंट्री होती है 9 संदिग्धों की। ये वो 9 सांस्कृतिक और आर्थिक फैक्टर्स हैं जिनकी जांच रिसर्चर ने की। तो चलिए एक एक करके इन सभी संदिग्धों से मिलते हैं। हमारा पहला संदिग्ध है राष्ट्रवाद, यानी अपने देश पर बहुत ज्यादा गर्व करना। सवाल ये है कि क्या इसका हिंसा से कोई लेना देना हो सकता है? दूसरा संदिग्ध निरंकुश सोच, ये दुनिया को सिर्फ सही और गलत, अच्छे और बुरे के चश्मे से देखने की आदत है। क्या इस तरह की सोच टकराव को जन्म देती है? तीसरा है धार्मिकता, मतलब कोई समाज अपनी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में धर्म को कितनी अहमियत देता है। क्या इसका हिंसा पर कोई असर पड़ता है? चौथा संदिग्ध थोड़ा पेचीदा है। इसे रिसर्चर ने सर्वशक्तिमत्ता का एहसास कहा है। मतलब कल्चर के लेवल पर यह महसूस करना कि हमारे पास हर चीज़ का कंट्रोल है और बेहिसाब चॉइस है। क्या ये फीलिंग कि हम कुछ भी कर सकते हैं खतरनाक हो सकती है? पांचवा है सत्तावाद। ये उस कल्चर की तरफ इशारा करता है जहां अथॉरिटी की इज्जत करने और आज्ञा मानने पर बहुत ज्यादा जोर दिया जाता है। हमारा छठा संदिग्ध है सामूहिकता। ये वो सोच है जहां एक व्यक्ति से ज्यादा उसके समूह को महत्व दिया जाता है। देखते हैं हिंसा की दरों पर इसका क्या असर होता है। सातवां है प्रतिस्पर्धात्मकता। जब कोई समाज हर चीज को एक रेस या कंपटीशन की तरह देखने लगता है, तो क्या इससे लोग ज्यादा आक्रामक हो जाते हैं? आठवां संदिग्ध है शक्ति की दूरी। ये बस इस बात को मापता है कि किसी समाज में लोग पावर के ऊंच नीच को, यानी असमान वितरण को कितना नॉर्मल मान के चलते हैं। और हमारा आखिरी संदिग्ध एक आर्थिक फैक्टर है, राष्ट्रीय संपत्ति। क्या सच में पैसा किसी समाज को ज्यादा सुरक्षित बना सकता है?
तो हमारे पास 9 संदिग्ध हैं। अब वक्त है सबूतों की जांच का। दुनिया भर के 81 देशों के डेटा को खंगालने के बाद कौन से फैक्टर्स असली मुजरिम बन के सामने आए, चलिए देखते हैं।
लेकिन नतीजों पर जाने से पहले एक शब्द को समझना बहुत जरूरी है, सर्वशक्तिमत्ता का एहसास। आसान भाषा में कहें तो ये एक कल्चरल विश्वास है कि हम कुछ भी हासिल कर सकते हैं और हमारे पास अनलिमिटेड ऑप्शंस और कंट्रोल है। और यहाँ आता है पहला और शायद सबसे चौंकाने वाला खुलासा। सर्वशक्तिमत्ता का एहसास हत्या की दरों के साथ बहुत मजबूती से जुड़ा हुआ था। इसका सीधा मतलब ये है कि जिन कल्चर्स में ये भावना ज्यादा थी कि वो कुछ भी कर सकते हैं, वहाँ असल में हिंसा भी ज्यादा थी। दूसरी तरफ एक और बड़ा फैक्टर सामने आया, लेकिन बिल्कुल उल्टे असर के साथ। वो था राष्ट्रीय संपत्ति या जीएनआई। यहाँ कनेक्शन नेगेटिव था। मतलब देश जितना अमीर था, वहाँ हिंसा उतनी ही कम थी। ये शायद उतनी हैरान करने वाली बात नहीं है, लेकिन कहानी यहीं खत्म नहीं होती। ये तो सिर्फ सुराग थे। असली मकसद क्या था, ये पता लगाने के लिए रिसर्चर ने और गहराई से देखा कि ये सारे सुराग आपस में कैसे जुड़े हुए हैं। और जब इन सभी 9 वेरिएबल्स को एक साथ देखा गया, तो पता चला कि ये असल में 2 बड़े ग्रुप्स में बटे हुए हैं। एक तरफ है सामाजिक आर्थिक विकास और दूसरी तरफ कुछ ज्यादा रहस्यमयी है, जिसे मनोसांस्कृतिक कारक कहा गया है। ये टेबल चीज़ों को एकदम साफ कर देती है। एक तरफ तो साफ सुथरे सामाजिक आर्थिक कारक हैं, लेकिन जो दूसरी तरफ है वो बहुत ही ज़्यादा दिलचस्प है। ये मनोसांस्कृतिक कारक 3 चीज़ों को जोड़ता है: सर्वशक्तिमता, राष्ट्रवाद और निरंकुश सोच। रिसर्च का तर्क है कि ये एक तरह से सामाजिक आत्ममुग्धता है, मतलब कल्चर के लेवल पर एक खतरनाक किस्म का घमंड।
तो इस पूरे विश्लेषण से हमें दुनिया के बारे में क्या पता चलता है? खैर, इससे हमें दुनिया का एक बिल्कुल नया नक्शा बनाने का मौका मिलता है। एक ऐसा नक्शा जो देशों की सरहदों पर नहीं, बल्कि उनकी कल्चरल साइकोलॉजी पर आधारित है।
और जैसा कि देखा जा सकता है, इस नए नक्शे पर दुनिया साफ तौर पर 3 बड़े कल्चरल ग्रुप्स में बंटी हुई नजर आती है। ये सिर्फ कोई अकादमिक एक्सरसाइज नहीं है, ये हमें दिखाता है कि हमारी संस्कृतियां कितनी गहराई से हमारे व्यवहार पर असर डालती हैं, भले ही हम अलग-अलग देशों में क्यों न रहते हों।
और आखिर में ये रिसर्च हमें एक बहुत बड़े सवाल के साथ छोड़ जाती है। अगर एक संस्कृति अपने लोगों में हिंसा को बढ़ावा दे सकती है, तो फिर हमारी अपनी संस्कृति, हमारे समाज की संस्कृति, हमारे अंदर क्या आकार दे रही है? ये एक ऐसा सवाल है जिस पर हम सभी को सोचना चाहिए।
I want you to stop whatever you are doing for just a second.
Just pause.
Yeah, just pause and consider a number. 100 million.
It's a heavy number.
It really is. That is a conservative estimate of the number of people killed in the 20th century alone, just due to wars and conflicts.
And looking at a staggering, genuinely grim statistic like that, it forces us into a deeply uncomfortable corner.
Right. It makes you ask, why is human history so thoroughly stained with violence? Like, are we looking at a glitch in our DNA? Is it an inescapable part of our biology?
Or is this bloodshed something that society actively teaches us to participate in?
Exactly.
It's basically the ultimate question of human nature, and diving into that specific tension between biology and society is our mission today. We are looking at a remarkably thorough piece of source material.
It really is incredible.
It's a 2010 doctoral thesis by Hamid Bashiria from the University of Koblenz-Landau, and it's titled Culture and Violence: Psychocultural Variables Involved in Homicide Across Nations.
What really hooked me about this source is that we aren't just looking at random, chaotic acts of aggression here.
Right, it's specific.
Yeah, the thesis focuses specifically on homicide as a measurable metric. And it looks at the data across 81 different nations.
Which is a massive data set.
It is, because when you look at the global map, some countries have persistently, chronically high homicide rates, year after year, decade after decade, while other nations remain consistently peaceful.
And the central argument of the thesis is that this constancy in violence, or the lack of it, isn't just some random accident. It is culture.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with the godfather of psychoanalysis himself, Sigmund Freud.
We have to start with Freud.
Right. My understanding is that early in his career, Freud didn't actually think aggression was its own independent drive. He had this concept called the hydraulic model.
The plumbing metaphor.
Exactly. So if you picture the human mind like a closed system of pipes, tension builds up inside us like steam.
And releasing that pressure
Yeah.
brings us pleasure.
Right, which he called catharsis. So in that early view, aggression was just a secondary reaction. It happens when our life instincts, our eros or libido, get suppressed.
And to explain how that suppression happens in the first place, Freud leaned heavily on the Oedipus complex.
Right, the classic Freudian theory.
Yeah. The theory goes that a young boy develops a strong subconscious affection for his mother, and he begins to see his powerful father as a rival.
Which obviously creates a terrifying internal conflict for the child.
A fear of severe punishment from the father, yes.
Yes.
So to resolve that intense anxiety, the child represses the desire and instead identifies with the father.
And Freud actually expanded this whole concept to the societal level, right, in his book Totem and Taboo.
He did. He suggested that human society effectively began with a primal patricide. A group of brothers killed their dominant father, felt immense guilt over the act, and then transform that bloody hatred into societal reverence and religious taboo.
But here is where the source material points out a massive cultural blind spot in Freud's thinking.
A huge blind spot.
He relied heavily on Greek mythology, specifically the story of Oedipus by Sophocles, to prove this was some universal human baseline. But when you look outside of Western antiquity, the theory hits a wall.
It really does. The thesis brings in Persian mythology to counter this idea of universality, which is just a really elegant critique.
I love this part.
Yeah, take the Persian tragedy of Rostam and Sorab. In this story, a father and son duel incognito, and the father ends up killing the son. Notice there's no female rivalry driving the bloodshed.
No mother figure to be possessed.
Exactly. Or look at the Epic of Siavosh. In that myth, a son actively refuses his stepmother's seduction. He even passes a sacred fire trial to prove his innocence and his absolute loyalty to his father.
Wow.
These counterexamples highlight that Freud's theories might not be the universal biological baseline he assumed. They are deeply, deeply culturally specific.
That completely flips the script on the idea that we all have this innate Oedipal rage. But Freud's views did shift dramatically later in his life, didn't they?
They did. Mainly because the unprecedented horrors of World War I completely disillusioned him.
I mean, how could they not?
Right. He realized civilization wasn't curing our violent urges. It was just a thin, deceptive cover for them. And that led to his dual instinct theory.
So it was no longer just Eros, the life instinct, running the show.
No, it became a constant battle between Eros and Thanatos, the death instinct, or what he called the Nirvana principle.
Thanatos, it's such a heavy concept.
It is the instinctual drive toward self-destruction, a desire to return to an inorganic, peaceful state of nothingness. In this later view, Freud argued that human aggression is simply this death instinct directed outward.
So if we don't destroy ourselves, our psyche projects that destructive energy onto an external enemy just to keep us alive.
Exactly.
And the source material brings us right into the modern day by linking that projected aggression to narcissism.
This is where it gets highly relevant.
Yes. Modern psychoanalytic research, specifically studies mentioned in the text by Bushman and Baumeister, Donnellan, and Webster, they show that aggression isn't necessarily linked to low self-esteem, which is a really common misconception.
People always assume bullies just have low self-esteem.
Right, but it's actually linked to something called threatened egotism. It happens when a highly narcissistic person feels insulted or disrespected. I want you, listening to this, to think about your own life for a second. When someone cuts you off in traffic and your blood absolutely boils.
We've all been there.
Is your anger just a protective survival reflex? Or is it threatened egotism? Is it your inner narcissist lashing out because your sense of superiority was briefly challenged by a stranger in a Honda Civic?
It's a challenging mirror to look into, for sure. And it provides a perfect bridge to our next major theorist, Erich Fromm. Fromm took these foundational psychoanalytic concepts and merged them with sociology and economics.
Before we get into Fromm's theories, we should probably add a quick disclaimer.
Yes, very important context.
Fromm was famous for his Marxist approach to psychoanalysis. As we unpack his ideas, we are impartially recording his economic and political views exactly as they are presented in the source material.
Right. We aren't taking a stance on his politics, left-wing or right-wing. We're just laying them out clearly to understand how he believed society generates violence.
Okay, so with that established, Fromm believed that humans are unique because we lack strict, rigid animal instincts, the ones that govern other species.
Because we don't have that hardwired biological programming, we have to develop what he called social characters to survive our specific economic realities.
Basically, our psychic energy is molded by the society we live in.
Exactly. And he outlined 5 main orientations or ways we adapt and relate to the world.
Let's walk through those 5 because they feel incredibly relevant today. First is the receptive orientation.
Right.
This is a person who basically waits for the world to give them things, always looking for a magic helper to solve their problems. Honestly, that sounds a lot like me waiting for my morning coffee to make me a functional human being.
A very relatable example. Second is the exploitative orientation. These people also rely on the outside world, but instead of waiting passively, they use force or cunning to take what they want. Think of the ruthless corporate shark.
Third is the hoarding orientation. These are people who build literal or emotional walls for security. They are characterized by extreme orderliness, obsession, and a deep fear of the outside world.
Fourth is the marketing orientation. Fromm saw this as a uniquely modern phenomenon. This is where people treat themselves as commodities to be exchanged on the market.
If you think about modern social media, where people literally brand their personalities to get likes and sponsorships, Fromm was predicting that decades ago.
It is uncanny. And finally, the fifth is his ideal, the productive orientation, where a person is driven by love, reason, and a genuine desire to actualize their human potential.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Fromm makes a profound distinction between 2 types of aggression, benign and malignant.
Benign aggression is something we share with animals. It's defensive, biologically adaptive, and life-preserving. It flares up when we are physically threatened and immediately subsides when the threat is gone.
But malignant aggression is entirely different. It is uniquely human.
Fromm argued that malignant aggression isn't a survival tool at all. It's tied to our character, to a warped sense of pleasure, and to a passion for pure destructiveness.
And he believed that insane social structures, which he explicitly identified as capitalism, force people into unproductive demands.
Yes, and this creates what he called anal character pathologies.
We should probably define anal in this context, or it's going to sound very strange to anyone who hasn't read early psychology textbooks.
Fair point. In Freudian psychoanalysis, the anal developmental stage is all about control, holding on to things, rigid order, and dominance.
And Fromm took that psychological concept and applied it to character types shaped by society.
He did. Two of the darkest manifestations of this pathology are sadism, which is the desire for absolute, unlimited control over another living being, and necrophilia.
And in Fromm's context, necrophilia doesn't just mean what it means in horror movies.
Right. It means a passionate, sweeping love for destruction, decay, and tearing things down. He pointed to historical figures like Stalin, Hitler, and Himmler as ultimate case studies.
To Fromm, these weren't just evil men. They were malignant, destructive characters birthed by unhealthy social and economic relations.
It's a chilling way to look at history. It shifts the blame from some abstract concept of human nature to the very tangible structures of human society.
Which brings us to our third perspective in the source material, the evolutionary lens.
Right.
For a long time, there was this very popular killer ape myth. It was promoted by writers like Raymond Dart and Robert Ardrey. The basic claim was that our ancient ancestors, the Australopithecus, were uniquely murderous primates, and we just inherited their bloodlust.
But the thesis points out that physical anthropologists have largely debunked this. Our ancestors weren't these uniquely bloodthirsty monsters roaming the savannah.
So to really understand the evolutionary biological perspective, the text introduces Konrad Lorenz.
He was one of the founding fathers of ethology, which is the study of animal behavior in their natural environments, rather than observing them locked in tiny laboratory cages.
And Lorenz proposed the big four instincts that drive all behavior: hunger, sexuality, flight, and fight.
For Lorenz, aggression, the fight instinct, isn't a character flaw. It's a highly beneficial survival tool. It preserves territory, ensures the strongest genes are passed on, and secures the best food resources.
He also believed in the spontaneity of aggression. This ties back a bit to Freud's plumbing metaphor. Lorenz thought aggressive energy naturally builds up in the organism over time and simply must be released.
But he noted that animals have ritualization. They use posturing, gestures, and triumph ceremonies to resolve conflicts without actually killing each other.
Although the text does note that modern science has pushed back on the idea that nature is quite that non-lethal.
Right. Nature can still be pretty brutal.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Lorenz observed that true love and friendship are only found in species that are highly aggressive.
Think about humans, wolves, and certain species of geese.
To genuinely love someone, you have to be able to recognize them as an individual separate from the rest of the flock or pack. And that individual recognition, structurally speaking, only evolved in species capable of deep territorial aggression.
So biologically, love and hate are tethered together.
It's a poetic thought.
It is. But just as we provided context for him, we have to look impartially at the historical backdrop of Lorenz's theories. Konrad Lorenz joined the Nazi Party in 1938.
That is a critical piece of context.
That historical reality deeply colored his worldview. He viewed aggression as an omnipresent natural rule, an unstoppable biological force that civilized society simply needs to find safe ways to discharge.
Furthermore, he directly applied animal concepts of territoriality to complex human concepts of ownership and privacy.
Exactly. If you view human property as biological territory, then a trespass isn't just a legal issue. It becomes a biological trigger for lethal defense.
So we've looked at the mind as a pressure cooker with Freud. We've looked at socially engineered malignant characters with Fromm. And we've looked at evolutionary territoriality with Lorenz.
What happens when you pull these theories out of the textbook and test them in the real world?
That is what the entire second half of Bashiri's thesis is dedicated to. Hard data. He tested 9 specific cultural variables across 81 different nations to see what actually correlates with national homicide rates.
The methodology here is rigorous. The 9 hypotheses he tested were nationalism, absolutism, omnipotence, authoritarianism, collectivism, competitiveness, power distance, and GNI.
Which stands for gross national income, effectively measuring a nation's wealth or poverty.
Let's briefly define a few of those so we have the full picture. Nationalism is pretty self-explanatory. the belief that your country is inherently superior.
Absolutism is a strict, rigid, black and white view of good and evil. There's no gray area.
Religiosity measures the influence of faith in daily life. Authoritarianism is the preference for strong, centralized power and strict obedience.
Competitiveness is your classic keeping up with the Joneses on a societal level.
We should also define power distance. This variable measures how much a society accepts unequal distributions of power. In a high power distance culture, you don't question your boss, and you certainly don't question your government. Inequality is just accepted as a fact of life.
Collectivism is the degree to which a society prioritizes the group or the family over the individual. And omnipotence, which we will come back to, is an excessive, inflated feeling of choice, control, and superiority.
Looking at that list of 9, if you asked me to guess the biggest driver of homicide, I would probably bet on authoritarianism. Or maybe absolutism.
Same. But when the statistical dust settled on those 81 nations, the results were incredibly clear. The two absolute strongest predictors of a high national homicide rate were low GNI, meaning severe economic poverty, and high omnipotence.
What's fascinating here is how the data revealed what the author calls the psychol factor, the psychocultural factor.
The data proved that poor socioeconomic development, just being broke, doesn't cause rampant violence all on its own.
Instead, poverty interacts with this cultural narcissism, this societal omnipotence.
Let's make sure we're getting the mechanism here. How exactly does that combination, being poor but culturally arrogant, spark actual murder?
It comes down to cognitive dissonance and shattered expectations. Imagine a society that constantly tells its citizens they are superior, that they have absolute control over their destiny, and that they deserve the world. That's the omnipotence.
But then the economy tanks, opportunities vanish, and people can't even afford basic necessities. That's the low GNI.
The gap between what the culture tells them they deserve and the bleak reality of what they actually have creates an intense, boiling frustration. When economic scarcity meets an inflated cultural ego, the friction is so severe it acts as a direct bridge to lethal violence.
The statistics on this were so clean that they neatly separated the 81 nations into 3 distinct clusters: Western, developing, and post-communist nations.
And the placement of each country all came down to how their wealth and this psychol narcissism interacted with each other.
This raises an important question for you, walking the dog or commuting right now. Think about the cultural values of the nation you live in.
How much does your society praise omnipotence, hyper-individualism, and the illusion that you can control everything around you?
And contrast that with how much it values communal support, realistic humility, and shared responsibility.
These invisible cultural variables aren't just academic concepts. They might be dictating the actual physical safety of the streets you walk on every single day.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at the staggering death toll of the 20th century, wondering if violence is in our blood.
We explored Freud's idea of an internal death instinct projecting outward to save our own egos.
We examined Fromm's theory that insane economic structures breed malignant, destructive characters who love control and decay.
We waded through Lorenz's belief that we are just territorial apes, needing to discharge built-up biological energy.
But in the end, the hard data from 81 nations points to a very specific toxic cocktail: economic deprivation mixed with a cultural obsession with omnipotence. That is the recipe for a deadly society.
Which leaves us with a final, forward-looking thought to consider. If the strongest drivers of national violence are economic scarcity paired with an inflated sense of cultural omnipotence, what exactly happens over the next few decades?
We are entering an era where artificial intelligence and automation are radically shifting global wealth, potentially increasing economic scarcity for vast portions of the population.
At the exact same time, our digital algorithms increasingly isolate us in tailored echo chambers that perfectly feed our personal narcissism and our illusions of omnipotence.
When you combine unparalleled economic anxiety with perfectly engineered digital arrogance, will we see an unprecedented spike in our collective malignant aggression?
Or is this the moment we finally recognize the trap, use our human ingenuity, and actively evolve into Fromm's ideal productive orientation, driven by reason and genuine connection?
That is definitely something to mull over the next time you log on to social media or read the latest economic headlines. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the hidden forces shaping your world, and we will catch you next time.